right, everybody, welcome to Human Monsters. We have a special guest with us today. We have Jane Boroski. She is the host of the Invisible Tears podcast, another true crime podcast, of course. And Jane, thank you very much. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me and allowing me to share my story with your audience.
Yes. So your personal story informs the content of the show. So if you could explain to us first what the show is about, what the premise is, and then tell us the story that led to your motivation to create this show to get that story out.
Yeah, thank you. I am host of Invisible Tears. I have a co-host, Amanda, and her husband, Drew. They also co-host with me, and they're all the behind the scenes. Uh, they do all the scenes for me. Um, I in 1988, I was 22. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was attacked by a serial killer. Um, I I had gone to a fair that night. I was by myself. A small fair. I live in a small community. Virtually in 1988, there was virtually no violent crime in the area. Um, Felt safe. Went to the fair in Swansea, New Hampshire. Had a great time. Met up with a lot of people I knew. Um, and then I headed home. That night was brutally hot and humid. Actually, that whole summer was, unfortunately. And I had stopped at a store to get a soda. The store was closed, but there was a vending machine outside. So I stopped there, grabbed a quick soda. And while I was sitting there, a vehicle came up and parked next to me. I didn't pay too much attention to it. Again, small community, virtually no violent crime, had no reason to be concerned. While I was sitting in the vehicle, he got out of his vehicle, walked behind my vehicle, opened my car door, and tried to take me out of my car. Um, we struggled. I somehow kicked him, and I ended up kicking my windshield and smashing my windshield. But I put on quite, I struggled with him a lot in the car. He was really trying to get me out. While we were in the car, he took out a knife and he was like, maybe this will persuade you to get out of the car. It did. Got out of my car. Uh, he had the knife up against my neck. We were up against my car. And all of a sudden he was like, I was like, what do you want? I couldn't understand why he was attacking me like he was. Again, I was 22 years old. So I he had turned around and he said to me, I beat up his girlfriend, and wasn't this a Massachusetts car? And I was like, no, I didn't beat up anybody's girlfriend. And this is a New Hampshire car. So he like walked around the back of the car to see the plates. And then he started walking to his vehicle. Well, at that time, I'm thinking, okay, he mistaken me for someone else. But then it clicked in my head, I have a smashed windshield. So I, you know, said, hey, asshole, what about my windshield? And I regret those words for the rest of my life because he turned around and came back to me, put the knife back up against my neck, and we stood there. He still was persistent. He wanted me to go with him. And then I saw a vehicle starting to drive by. Now, this is about 11:30 at night. And we were on like a main road. So I see a vehicle coming, and I knew in my head, the only way I was going to get out of that situation was run as fast and as hard as I could to the road and scream and try and get somebody's attention. So I did that. I bolted to the road. And when I bolted to the road, he like ran after me and tackled me down just like a football player. And the car just drove off. And I was on my back, and the next thing I know, he started stabbing me. And He ultimately stabbed me 27 times.
Jesus.
I had a lot of defensive wounds because I was trying to protect my baby. Um,
How
I
how deep were these incisions?
Pretty deep where I had two collapsed lungs. He did cut my jugular. He cut a tendon in my knee. He cut a tendon in my thumb. Those are my thumb was mostly defensive wounds. A lot of wounds on my chest. He lacerated a piece of my liver.
Jesus.
So the stabs were pretty deep.
Did the blood loss
Um,
leave you feeling really weak too?
it did. It did. I think my body went into shock though, because I had enough strength. When he was done stabbing me, he got up and went to his vehicle, and I had enough strength to roll over and get up on my hands and knees. And that's when he drove by me. I happened to look up, and he drove by me and looked right down at me. And he drove off into the night. So I was able to gather enough strength, and I got to my car, and I got in my car and started my car, and I started driving down the road trying to find help. And before I knew it, I was right behind him. I was like, oh
Oh
my God,
my
I'm right
God.
behind this guy. So it wasn't like he was speeding off. I may have been speeding a little bit too. I don't quite remember a whole lot of that. I could feel the blood just gushing out of me. I could hear it just gushing out of me. So I was bleeding pretty bad. And I drove about 2 miles down the road. I was behind him. I was kind of terrified because I was like, oh my God, he's going to see where I pull in. But I pulled into my friend's driveway and went up to his door. And I was like, somebody just stabbed the shit out of me. You need to get me help. And I collapsed on his steps. Um, And I mean, I survived, and my baby survived. I ended up carrying my baby for another 2 months, and she was born with a lot of medical issues. She was on a ventilator for a few weeks, and she had to fight for her life for about 2 3 weeks.
Was that due
Um,
to the blood loss, like being deprived of oxygen and other nutrients, or
Yeah, I think I had a lot to do with my body being stressed, my body going into shock. I did have a couple of surgeries after my attack while I was pregnant with her. Um, she was born a blue baby, so she had no blood pressure. So it could have, they think it had quite a bit to do with my attack. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
just like how a fetus is affected by the mother's diet and lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure that it's affected by the mother's emotional state too.
Emotional and trauma, the trauma of everything that happened to me and my body. And yeah, it had a lot to do with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So how about the emotional impact on you? Do you experience PTSD? Is that been a problem?
Yeah, well, after my attack, there was a few factors that came into play. One, very shortly after my attack, I found out that I was a possible victim of a serial killer, and I found out that there were at least 7 other victims that didn't survive.
All women, right?
Yeah, it was the Connecticut River Valley serial killer.
What was his name?
We don't know our
I never
cases.
found him.
All the cases are still unsolved. 37 years later, they're still unsolved. Uh,
So there was just a streak of murders in the late 80s, and then that's it. Mm.
yes, yes, up and down the Connecticut River Valley, like the 91 corridor between Vermont and New Hampshire.
Mm.
Yeah, there was 7 victims, possibly 8. They have not quite connected the eighth one. Um, so I had that going through my mind. Oh my God, he's a serial killer. I'm the only survivor. Is he coming back for me? So fear came in, and I lived a long time where I couldn't be alone. Um, And after my attack, I didn't receive any counseling. This is the 80s.
Yeah.
Mental health wasn't as talked about as it is now back in the 80s. Um, so I was just, released from the hospital, have a nice life. Physically you've healed, but mentally I wasn't.
But
And
surely you must have some physical health issues since then, right?
today I do not.
Oh, you
I
don't?
do
Oh, that's
not.
good. Yeah.
I fully healed 100% physically. It took a few months. I did have a few surgeries, but yeah, besides the scars that are a reminder every day, physically I'm right back to normal. Mentally, for the first 20 years, um, I thought I was living a normal life, but uh, the first 20 years after my attack, I never received counseling. And then once I started receiving counseling in 2010, I realized my life was anything but normal. And that's when I was clinically diagnosed with PTSD. Um, one of my one of the things that people that have gone through trauma or are diagnosed with PTSD, um, they they end up having an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and my addiction was gambling. The addiction, it's like a protection for you. You feel safe with that addiction. And you also
And it's a
you try to
distraction too.
forget. You try to forget what happened to you with your addiction. And my addiction was gambling. I had a serious gambling problem for almost 20 years. And it was so bad that, I made a lot of bad choices. And I've taken full responsibility for the bad choices I made. And I ultimately ended up going to jail for my bad choices. And, today I'm a convicted felon. Um, but I never tried to use my attack as an excuse. I took full responsibility. But my counselor always reminds me I can't forget that, my attack, uh, my addiction was a direct result of my attack. Um, so I began healing in 2010. Um, and that's when I decided to start sharing my story. I did some real intense therapy and counseling for 7 years. PTSD doesn't go away, but I've learned how to, one, accept it, and two, I now have tools for how to react to my PTSDs and the symptoms. Um, so I wanted to share my story, so I started Invisible Tears, which it tells my story because my story didn't end the day I was attacked.
Yeah.
People sometimes are under the assumption that when you go through something traumatic, um, you eventually just uh, accept it, get over it, and move on.
No.
And that is the furthest thing from the truth.
It,
I wish that's what happened, but it's not what happened.
your memory's on a loop. It just keeps playing it over and over. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many symptoms, and I hid everything for 20 years. People didn't know that I was a compulsive gambler for a long time. People didn't know that I was crying a million tears in silence. You know, People didn't know that I suffered, depression and attempted suicide twice or any of that. And I hid everything because I wanted people to think. I had so many people tell me so many times how strong I was and how amazing I was, and how lucky I was to be alive. And so I felt like I had to live up to that. And I felt as if, okay, if I show people that, how much I was hurting inside and how much I was going through with my PTSD, that would show weakness. And for some reason I didn't want to show that. I wanted to, live up to their expectations of me. And
Was it
but
hard when the police began investigating it? Obviously, they would want a statement and they would want you to give a description for a composite sketch. So was, immediately after all that happened, was that difficult to delve into?
it really wasn't. I mean, the detectives were up at the hospital almost every day. I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks. So almost every day they were up there questioning me, asking me questions, interviewing me. And it was as if I put myself into this survival mode where I was just going to tell them what they needed to know and show no emotion. Because I don't think it had really hit me yet the the extent of what happened to me. And I just I was just trying to just move on and get past it. And so as they're interviewing me, I never really showed the emotional aspect of what it did to me. It was like I just described what happened that day and gave them details of what happened that day. And I did a composite while I was in the hospital and description of the vehicle and all that. So, um, you know, I did that without any emotion. I don't know how I did it. I just think it was just a survival mode that I had to go into, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, the human brain has a tendency when it comes to really traumatic incidents like a violent attack to black out certain parts of it. I mean, it doesn't black it out entirely, but it can be hard to remember blow by blow. So do you remember it in patches like that?
It's funny that you say that because shortly after, about 6 months after my attack, they really wanted to try to get the license plate on the vehicle because they knew that I was driving behind him. So they brought me in to see a criminal profilist, John Philpin, amazing man. He's worked with all these cases, profiling all the cases and stuff. Been friends with him still today. I'm friends with him 37 years later. And so I went in to see him and he hypnotized me. And it was recorded, with a camera. Now we're back in the 80s. So it was this big honking camera that they set
Yeah.
up. And so they hypnotized me and they recorded it. And I never really saw the recording until a couple of weeks ago. I sat and watched the recording for the first time. And it was almost like an outer body experience. Like I'm watching this 22-year-old girl talk about the most horrific thing that's ever happened to her, the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to her. She's sitting there describing bits and pieces and just in great detail of what happened to her. And then, you know, while I'm watching it and while I'm watching myself on this video, I realized that there were a lot of details that I have forgotten over the years. There were a lot of details that I have forgotten then too. It was quite interesting. I was able to watch it and be okay with it. And I think that's because of all the counseling that I have had. And I knew that I'm in a very good place right now, mentally. Because a lot of people were concerned that I watched that video. It was a 3-hour video. It was a 3-hour session I had with him. And people were like really concerned with my mental health because I have been doing so well for the past, 12 years. And so people were concerned, but I felt like I was okay. And I really felt like I was ready to see that and ready to watch it. And it was interesting because I did see a lot of details that I completely forgotten about, which was really, really interesting.
I've never been hypnotized. Do you remember the hypnosis?
No, I don't.
Oh, that's
I
interesting.
absolutely do not. No. Um, No,
So
I
it's
don't. I was in a deep trance, and
yeah.
yeah, I don't remember uh, any of it.
Hmm.
No.
So it kind of involves your daughter too, since you were pregnant during the time of the attack. So I'm thinking, so you've gone public with it on this podcast. So I'm assuming you probably have told her about it. And if so, what was her reaction?
Yeah, I've always been open with my daughter about what happened and, you know, uh, her birth, my attack. She's always known, and it's always been pretty public, on TV. We did unsolved mysteries way back in the '90s, and
I've been watching that. Oh wow! So I'm probably going to end up seeing you. Do you remember what year it was?
it was 1990 or 91, one of the two. I
No.
don't exactly remember the date or the episode. I haven't been able to find it online, so it's like,
Well, it's on Amazon Prime. All the Robert Stack episodes. Yeah.
yeah, so it's like '90s, '91 maybe,
Yeah, I've been
somewhere
watching
around
that
there.
part of the show. Yeah, I'm on the third season. Maybe I'll end up seeing you there.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So my daughter, I've always been real open with her, and she's the one actually that really encouraged me to do the podcast because the podcast started. We were in the middle of the pandemic. We were in the shutdown phase where stay-at-home orders or whatever you want to call it. And so me and her were sitting around, and of course, kind of bored, trying to find something to do. And she's like, "Hey, let's listen to true crime podcasts. We never do that." So we started listening to some true crime podcasts, and she's like, "I'm going to punch in Connecticut River Valley Killer or Connecticut River Valley Murder." And so she punched that in, and there was quite a few podcasts that were covering it. And we're listening to it, and she's like, "Oh my God, Mom, half the stuff they have on there isn't even true or fact or anything. And some of it is, misinformation." So then she punched in my name, and some podcast came up with my name on it. And she's like, "Some of that info is so incorrect." And she was like, "You need to do a podcast. That's it. You need to do a podcast." And I didn't even know where to begin to do that because I'm like tech savvy zero, zero. So
So what were their errors?
just a lot about suspects and where I was, what town I lived in, or what town it happened in. Um, the other victims, some of their attacks, how they were attacked, or where they were last seen, or a lot of it is misinformation.
Yeah, I
It,
think a lot of true crime podcasters forget that it's journalism. Journalism
yeah,
is supposed to be stick to the facts, not
yep,
conjecture, and I guess
exactly.
yeah,
Yep, yep. Uh, your
due
research.
diligence. Yeah.
Gotta do your research. So we got a hold of Andrew and his wife Amanda. I've known Andrew his whole entire life. Me and his mom are really good friends. So he's super smart and super savvy with technology. And so we got a hold of him and his wife, and we created Invisible Tears in 2 years. We just launched in September. We got really lucky. We signed on with Glassbox, and they do all our sponsoring and all that. And it's been great. I've also got hooked up with Crawl Space Media, Tim and Lance and Jen, and they're starting another project called Dark Valley, which they're centering around the Connecticut River Valley killings and the murders, but they're doing more investigative work with it, and they're also diving more into the victims and what their lives were like before they were so brutally taken away from us. Um, so I'm actually between both projects. Invisible Tears is my baby, but I'm also involved with Dark Valley with Jen. That's going to be launching very soon, I believe the beginning of May. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, Invisibility is going to be focusing on my life after my attack, because there's so much. I mean, I had to go through, victims have to go through financial um, impacts. The financial impact of my attack was phenomenal. I had over $100,000 worth of medical bills.
Oh God.
I had nobody to give them to because my case was unsolved. We didn't know who attacked me, so I was liable for them. I had hate letters sent to me. Believe it or not, it was back before technology, and people actually sat and wrote letters and wrote me hate letters and
What
sent
what what
them to
was
me.
the content? What did the content of those letters
Oh,
consist of?
I needed to stop being a victim because I made that choice to stop and get that soda in the middle of the night, and I put my unborn child in danger, and I should have known better. And yeah, the letters are absurd. I should be turned into family services, and I should not have custody of my child, and I'm an unfit parent, and uh,
Well,
I should take responsibility for my actions.
those
And
people are no better than him.
it was
As evil as he is. Yeah.
it was ridiculous. And so I went through that. Those letters were sent to me like 3 to 5 years after my attack. So I mean, I'm still processing my attack, and here I am. I got these letters telling me it's your fault you were attacked. Stop being, playing the victim card. And I hid those letters from everyone. Um, and I began to believe those letters too.
Were there
Uh,
letters of support too?
no,
No.
no,
Well,
I
did
never.
you ever end up?
I had a big support system in my community. My community supported me so much, showed me so much love, and I always had people, in the community come to me. Do you need anything? Can we help you in any way? So yeah, the community support was amazing.
Have you met any of the family members of the women who did not survive?
I have, I have, yes.
Have
Um,
you interviewed them on your show or?
I have one that I'm going to be interviewing in a couple of weeks. Most of the interviews with the family members are going to be on Dark Valley. Yeah, so yeah, most of them will be on Dark Valley. I did have a wonderful interview with the criminal profiler, John Philpin, which really was amazing. Um, Now, after my attack, New Hampshire and Vermont formed a task force to try to find out who this is, and John Philpin was very involved with that task force. So he was very involved with both Vermont and New Hampshire officials with the investigation. So I did a wonderful interview with him. Um, and I've done some interviews with, about mental health. Um, we talk a lot about mental health and what victims go through, that people don't realize what victims of trauma goes through. Because it was a lot. It was a lot. People didn't realize, a lot of people thought, especially after they started listening to my podcast, in their minds, okay, I was attacked. I was, I was in the hospital, and then I healed, and then I had my baby, and then my life went on as normal. People are under that assumption. So when they hear my podcast, they're like, oh, I was, people are coming and emailing me and contacting me and saying, "Oh my God, I never felt so heard." Um, you know, I was a victim of a rape, and you are saying everything I've always wanted to say, and you validate my feelings, and that means the world to me, and that's exactly why I'm doing the Invisible Tears podcast, is in hopes of helping that one person that you know needs the help and wants the help. I had one lady contact me and said, I know I've had PTSD for at least 7 years. I was a a victim of domestic violence and never received counseling, but because I hear because I heard your podcast, I just signed up for counseling to help me with my PTSD. I mean, that's huge. You know, she's going and getting counseling because she heard my podcast, and that's why I'm doing it. It's exactly why I'm doing it, to help others and hopefully. And I also want to make everybody, you know, very well aware. My case and all these cases are still unsolved. The Connecticut River Valley cases are unsolved. And I'm going to mention the names. There is Bernice Quartermarsh, Ellen Freed, Eva Morse, Linda Moore, Elizabeth Chickering, Kathy Milliken. I don't want to forget anybody. And Barbara Agnew. These were all victims of the Connecticut River Valley killer. All their cases remain unsolved. And maybe people hearing my story, maybe somebody will come forward with information. You know, that would be wonderful.
And from what you've been able to glean from the findings of the autopsies on the victims who were murdered, were they attacked in a similar manner that you were?
Well, most of them, their remains were very, they were just bones. Um, their remains were, you know, what do I want to say? Too decomposed. Um, the few that they could do autopsies on, yes, they were stabbed. Yep. And they believe the other ones were stabbed too, I guess, from, I guess when they were stabbed, the knife had hit a bone or something, so that they could, somehow they determined that most of them were stabbed. Yeah.
And was sexual assault a factor in it?
Don't believe any of them were sexually assaulted. Really not sure with some of them because their remains were so decomposed and just, you know, bones. So not really sure. That's always been undetermined.
And so, say they did find out who did this. By the way, were you able to estimate how old he was? Was he older than you, same age, or?
He was between 30 and 35, you know, early to mid 30s.
So I guess he'd be what, in his 70s now if he were still alive?
Late 60s, yeah, somewhere around there.
So
Yeah.
if you were find out that they finally discover who it is and brought him to justice, would that bring you relief or an inner peace, or can anything do that?
It would give myself and the families answers. There's never closure in something like this. I mean, these families lost loved ones. If they solve this, it doesn't bring the loved ones back. But it will give the family answers. And I think that's what they and myself, that's all we want is answers. I know after my attack, they stopped. And my concern was always, is there going to be another victim? I didn't want there to be another victim. But as far as we know, they stopped. I guess it would give me, if he's still alive, I would be able to give an impact statement, which is something I've always hoped that I could do. And I could be, you know, I could show him that, you know, I'm here, I survived, you know, you didn't conquer what you wanted to with me. But it would give answers. I don't think it would give me, I guess it would give me some sort of peace. Definitely not closure. but some sort of peace, you know. One of my things is I want to be a voice for the victims because they don't have a voice anymore. So I always try to talk about them and their lives, and because they were all living lives. They all had lives. There was a few of them that were mothers. They had sisters, mothers, fathers, cousins, um, aunts, uncles, families, friends that loved them. And this monster just took them away from them.
Speaking of which, how did your family react at the time that the attack occurred?
Um, Sad, worried about me all the time. My husband always worried about me. For a long time, I couldn't be alone. I couldn't be alone. I couldn't go anywhere alone. He was very concerned for me and my safety. Um, but my family is really supportive of me too. Uh, yeah, they were very supportive.
Do you ever worry that it could happen to your daughter?
Absolutely. Every day. She does not leave my house without a can of mace.
Yeah.
Does not. Yeah, I do worry. I was I also have a son. I had my son 5 years after my attack, and um, I've always been that overprotective parent. Um, didn't let them do a whole lot or go anywhere without me knowing where they were and who they were with. And I didn't like them going anywhere by themselves. I always wanted them to have somebody with them. And so, yeah, I was a very protective parent. Yeah, very.
Another another way to pursue that advocacy maybe is to make a documentary too. If you can.
We're working on that.
Oh, they are really. Oh, wow. That's
Yes, we
cool.
are. We're actually working on that with Crawlspace Media with Dark Valley. We're hoping Dark Valley is going to convert over to a documentary. Yeah,
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
yeah. But unfortunately, nobody wants to buy it. So we're still
Yeah.
working. We're still working on it, and they have a lot of connections. So Jen's working really hard on trying to get connections for it, and so yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
Um,
most documentaries are not big money makers. Nowadays, your best hope nowadays is to get it on Netflix. They
yeah,
they have a lot of true crime documentaries there.
yeah, yeah. And I'm also been very encouraged. Everybody's encouraging me to write a book. I've never wrote a book. Um,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
so I'm going to be in the next year or so. I'm going to start working on writing my story, writing a little book on my story and my life after my attack. And I think that would be a good healing thing for myself.
Yeah, I'm sure it would
um,
be. Yeah.
to help me to continue with my healing and really reflect on what I've actually been through.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, he want that was during at the. I'm thinking about the moment where he decided to leave. Did you do something like play possum, play dead to make him think that he had killed you so that he could leave, or
No, he just stabbed me 27 times and got up and walked away.
no? He just I guess he thought that was enough, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure that he left me thinking he left me for dead.
Well, you were probably
Absolutely.
a very healthy person at the time to endure that much
Yeah.
stabbing and get and live.
I believe I survived because I was pregnant and I wanted my baby to survive. And my baby very much wanted to survive. And I truly believe this to the day I die. If I wasn't pregnant with her, I don't believe I would have survived.
So
I
did
think she gave me the extra strength, and you know, I really wanted her to survive,
so
and that's what I mostly fought for.
he completely missed the uterus, the amniotic sac didn't hit that at all. Yeah.
I carried her for another 2 months, amazingly, amazingly. But you know what? He stole a lot from me. Like, you know, instead of enjoying my last 2 months of pregnancy and getting excited about, being a new mom for the first time and getting a nursery set up and, you know, do going shopping for some new baby stuff. I was afraid to go anywhere. I was constantly meeting with the detectives and the police, and um, this is all. My attack was you know, a constant in my life for the last 2 months, and I felt a lot of anger about that.
When you yeah,
I
when you're scrutinized that much by the police, did it get to a point where it started to come across as a bit insensitive or invasive or?
No, no, not really, because I knew. I mean, it was like shortly after that, while I was in the hospital after my attack, is when I found out there were others. So I was more into doing the interview as much as they were, because I really wanted this guy to be caught. Every time they came up to the hospital for 3 weeks, I'm like, so you found him? Because for some reason, I had it in my head that they were going to find him very quickly. And so every time they came, I was like, so did you find him? And they're like, no, no. And it was like, 6 months go by, a year goes by, 5 years goes by, 10 years goes by. And it's like, after that, you just feel like, okay, he's not going to get caught. He's not going to be found. He's not going to be charged and convicted. And, I'm not going to have any answers. The families aren't going to have any answers. So that's when it really gets discouraging, and, you kind of lose hope. Um, but I'm like, nope, I'm not going to lose hope. That's the only thing I have right now is hope.
So
Um,
it's a rare unsolved case where there are not at least a few theories, some suspicions. People said, "Well, I saw this guy. He seemed to be something." Is there
oh
anything
my
like that?
God. I'll tell you, I've had, I've had, true crime is huge, and it has
Yeah,
been
yeah.
for years. It really has been for years, even before podcasting. Over the years, I bet I've had 50 people stop at my house, come to my house physically and say, I know who did this to you. It was my uncle, it was my cousin, it was somebody I went to school with, it was my husband, it was, my brother or my neighbor. Or I've had so many people come to my house say that they've been investigating the Connecticut River Valley cases for a few years and they figured it out. They solved the case. I had this one lady drive 6 hours from New York, come to my house just to tell me that she solved it. She'd been working on the case for like 7 years and she solved it, and this is who it was. And, I had to come to the point where I had to say, I couldn't listen to them anymore, because it was like so many. It's like, how could there be this many people, guilty of this one crime? There can't be. And so, I was constantly sending them to, I was constantly sending them up to the cold case unit in Concord. I said, you need to give your information to them. And their response was, well, we're not getting any response. They're not checking into my information. They haven't come and they haven't come and interviewed the person I told them it was, so they lose patience. So they come to me. And I still have people coming to my door, physically coming to my door. And it's like, don't do that. Go to the authorities, give them your information, because there's nothing I can do with the information. What you give me, I'm just handing over to them. There's nothing I can do with this information. So yeah, I've dealt with that for a lot of years, a lot of years.
So aside from unsolved mysteries, did you do a lot of other press at the time?
I didn't do a lot of press in the 80s. I ended up, um, I ended up hooking up with this one private investigator, which was completely convinced that it was the name all over the internet, Michael Nicolau. Did a few press conferences with her, and after the cold case unit has investigated him, and I ended up having a few people that I know looking into him and stuff. We decided it wasn't Michael Nicolau. He definitely was not the one. He was a bad man. He definitely was a bad man, but he wasn't the Connecticut River Valley Killer. I did do another show, Dark Minds, with William Phelps. He's an author. He does a lot of books on true crime, and so he had a show. Was it Dark Minds? And so I did do a episode with him on that. But people say, oh, you get your face out there and your name out there. Well, back in the 80s, when a victim was attacked or raped or whatever, back in the 80s, media put their name out there, put their face out there, the victims' names, the victims' faces. And I'm so glad that that's changed nowadays, because I cannot tell you how I felt 2 weeks after my attack, reading my name in the paper, knowing this guy has not been found yet or identified. This guy knows my name. It's in the paper. He's going to come for me. That kind of heightened my fear. Today, they don't do that. If if you are victimized in any way, they do not put your name in the paper anymore, which I think is amazing.
Well, it was only
unless you're a missing person.
Oh yeah, in the 1980s, that was when victim advocates first appeared. Before then, victims were in even worse position.
Yes, it was horrible. It was horrible. I never had a victim advocate, and that was another thing that I started in the 80s too, was New Hampshire was one of like 6 states that didn't have a victim compensation fund, which is federally funded for victims and victims' families, homicide victims' families. It's a wonderful program. They finance counseling. They help you with all your court dates. They help you with an advocate. They help you with so many things, paying for funerals, paying for lost time for work. It's a wonderful program. At the time of my attack, that program did not exist in New Hampshire. So I helped to make this program available in New Hampshire. I had to tell my story to the state capitol, and they finally passed the bill that New Hampshire has a victim compensation fund program, and it's helped thousands of people in New Hampshire, thousands, financially, helped them get counseling, helped the families of homicide victims with court dates and going to court and getting them lawyers, and it's a wonderful program. Times have advanced. Things have advanced since the 80s, especially with helping victims of violent crimes, or helping victims of families of victims of homicides, and I'm glad that that's happening today. And now mental health is more open now. People are more open with mental health and receiving help with PTSD, and I'm really glad that that's we still have a long ways to go with it, but it is mental health is more recognized today than it was in the 80s.
And from getting to know some of the family members of the victims who did not survive, what was the impact on some of them? I mean, I can imagine. I mean, beyond devastated, of course. Um, without naming names, what was the effects on some of them? I mean, it must be hard for them not to just shut down completely, right?
I know one of the victim's brothers became a serious alcoholic. I know another victim's son has been in trouble off and on throughout the years of him growing up without a mom. Um, I'm trying to think of. Oh, I know another sibling of a victim um, suffers PTSD and has been suicidal in the past. It's really impact families a lot. You know, they lost a loved one to murder, and they still don't have any answers. Um, I think that's sad.
And
Um,
it's hard for a lot of these men now. They're single dads raising children. I mean, it's never easy to be a single parent, but I think maybe it's harder for men to be single parents of little children.
yeah, yeah.
And and so I think I might have seen that unsolved mystery segment. So did you pull over to, like, I don't know if it was a strip mall or a motel to get a soft drink? I think.
It was a closed store.
Yeah,
It was a store that was closed. There was a big parking lot.
yeah. I think I did see it. Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
And the guy who assaulted you, was he kind of like a redneck type, or kind of disheveled and
He was, if you looked at him, he was a normal guy you would not feel threatened to see on the streets. Um, but he acted confused about a lot of things.
Hmm.
Um, and very stoic, like emotionless,
Yeah,
extremely emotionless.
yeah, that's an interesting thing I've learned by having a true crime podcast for 4 years. It's not always the people who come across as sketchy who end up being violent and us who commit these crimes against people. Often it's people who appear to be normal who end up doing it. Like, nobody suspected Ted Bundy of having that side to him. He came across
Exactly.
normally.
Very great example. Yes. Yes.
So this guy didn't, at the onset, just when he first appeared, you didn't think, there's something off about this guy.
No. No, because when I was sitting in my car, he was parked on the passenger side of my car, and he was just sitting there. Now, in front of me where I was parked right in front of the soda machine, and right in front of the soda machine was a payphone. So I assumed he was either there using the payphone or he was the same as me, he was getting a soda, you know. I didn't find it strange at all. You know, again, the community is small, the community was safe. I didn't feel threatened, and he didn't look like this big monster when he got out of his vehicle, you know. Um, yeah, didn't feel threatened by him at all. Not
Well,
until
yeah, the serial killers who know what they're doing, I think they do tend to target women in small communities because they're more trusting, they feel safer, they don't assume that kind of behavior of anybody.
I believe he was hunting. I call it hunting because I was there getting a soda. Um, he took Barbara Agnew from a rest area on 91. He took Eva Ellen Freed, just got off the payphone from talking to her sister in front of a store. So, and then Bernice Cornamash and Eva Eva Morse, they were both hitchhiking. So I believe he did a lot of traveling. He hunted. He was looking for that victim of opportunity. And I think that's what I was. I was a victim of opportunity. He had drove by, saw me, pulled in, and I was a victim of opportunity. Noticed that I was alone. Um, and I believe that's how he has found most of his victims.
With the killing spree ended so long ago, um, is it a cold case now, or is the investigation still ongoing?
Um, Most of the cases are cold cases. I've heard a few months ago that my case has reverted back to an active case, but I haven't heard much from them. I haven't heard much from them in the past 37 years. I mean, the first 6 months, I heard from them almost, monthly, weekly, daily. And then after that, I hadn't heard from them for years. I did hear from them when they're the ones that approached Unsolved Mysteries and asked me if I would do Unsolved Mysteries with them. So they did approach me with that. But after that, I hadn't heard from them in years until a few months ago.
Did the FBI investigate it as well?
Nope. The FBI wanted to come in and help them, and between Vermont and New Hampshire, they decided they didn't need their help. So the FBI was never involved in any of the cases, even with the the task force that they formed. They didn't. The FBI wasn't a part of that either. No.
Oh, okay. And so so how are you doing now? I mean, in terms of is the paranoia gone? Can you walk the streets and feel at ease, or?
Mentally, I'm good. Yeah, I feel I how do I describe this? I have my days sometimes when I know that, especially when I'm doing you know, a lot of podcasting, a lot of research on some of these cases. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed, and after a few weeks of you know, doing this, I have to take a step back and take a break. And that's the difference in my life today than it was 12 years ago. Now I know when, okay, this is overwhelming. I need to take a step back, take a little break. And, I have a granddaughter now. So
Mhm.
she's like, my daughter had a daughter. And so she helps me a lot. It's like, okay, I need to take a break. Come on, get in the car. Let's go do something fun. I do a lot with her. She's 9 now. And, I know my limits. And, uh, you know, with the counseling and learning I have tools to use now when I get overwhelmed, or I get anxious, or I feel like I'm, feeling depressed or down, or, paranoia or any of that. I have tools now I can use to, help myself. And I recognize when I'm having that low, and I didn't before. So today I'm really good. The podcast, as much as I know that it's helped others, it's equally helped me too. It's me opening up about a lot of things that I hadn't talked about with anybody. It has helped me so much.
And in terms of the ways that it impacts your relations with others, last week I interviewed a guy who his brother was murdered, and he he was talking about the fact that if he meets someone and it's a prospect for friendship, and then they find out that he has this very dark and morbid, tragic event in his life, they'll stop talking to him. It's like that has a way of marking Pollyannish, fair weather people can't deal with it. Have you encountered that at all?
Um, Over the years, especially since I started the podcast, um, a lot of people have come to me and said, I've always wanted to talk to you about your attack, but I was afraid that it would trigger something in you. I always wanted to, ask questions. And I was just so I didn't know how to approach you and talk to you about it, because I didn't know that you wanted to talk about it. And so, never over the years, people kind of avoided the subject with me. They avoided talking about it. And just felt like I was like, living this normal life, and I was a strong person, and I had moved on from it. Um, it's now, I mean, I have friends that I have been friends with for 35 years listening to my podcast, and they're like, we had no idea you were going through that stuff. Had no idea. We didn't know how to talk to you about it. We wish you had come to us, and didn't realize you were in that much pain for so many years. So, now everybody's more open with me. They want to ask questions. They talk to me about it. And that helps me, because suppressing it and keeping it inside was the worst thing I could have done. Not talking about it was the worst thing I could have done. But now I talk about it very openly. Anybody who wants to talk about it or ask me questions or whatever, I'm very open. It doesn't trigger anything anymore, because I don't focus on him. That's one thing. That's another thing that I want to do with the podcast. And I think true crime needs to step up and start doing this. Stop glorifying the monsters. Stop glorifying the people that are the ones that have done so much damage to other people. That we got to stop glorifying them and start focusing on the victims. And what their lives are like now, and their families' lives are like now, versus glorifying the monsters. I refuse to glorify him. I
Yeah.
very seldom talk about him in my podcast.
I guess you better
Um,
not see any of the serial killer tattoos that some people get. Well, there was one guy. Do you
I
know?
see him.
Do you know who Josef Fritzl is?
I don't.
He's not a serial killer. What he did was he incarcerated his daughter in an underground bunker for 24 years, raped her frequently, got her pregnant 7 times, beat her up. He was just tortured his daughter, and somebody had a tattoo of him. I was like, what message are you trying to send to the world?
See, I don't understand that. I understand that people are fascinated and want to know, like, about Ted Bundy. What made him the monster that he became? Um, I get that. Um, I've studied several serial killers because I wanted to know what was going through the mind of this monster that attacked me. Why? What would make him do that? I have a lot of questions about him. Why did he attack me? Why did he kill the other woman? What kind of life did he possibly have to make him turn into such a monster? I did all kinds of research on serial killers and their mind frames. And you know, yeah, I guess you get into like investigating and looking into people like Ted Bundy. It's fascinating. But when they're not caught and cases are still unsolved and they've basically gotten away with murder, don't glorify them.
No.
Absolutely not.
And you still live in the same community where the attack happened.
I do.
And
I,
did you avoid the locations where the assault happened? And
for a little while, I didn't drive by that store a lot. Today I shop there.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's how I know I've healed. I shop there. They have good meat. I mean,
And in a small community, everyone knows each other, but then
yeah.
undoubtedly you became a local celebrity. What was that like? Was that kind of strange too? Or
Sometimes it
people
was.
staring at you when you went out to shop or whatever?
No, not so much that, but like, you know, I at some of my jobs, I work with somebody for 3 years, And then, we have a conversation while we're working one day, and I say, yeah, I'm Jane I'm the girl that was attacked at Gamarlo's in Swansea. And they're like, you're the one that was pregnant. And, people get shocked about it. But, a lot of people, everybody knows that happened to me. And, you know, I don't have a lot of people coming up to me and saying, oh, I recognize you. I know who you are. You know, um, I've had a couple of people that have seen me on Dark Minds. But I mean, like Unsolved Mysteries, my face is blocked out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Did they distort your voice too? So you're sounding like this, or?
I think so.
Yeah.
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 Well, I thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that'll inspire other people to come forward if they've experienced a similar thing. And
Absolutely.
glad to see that you've healed as much as you can, and you've been able to carry on with your life.
Thank you. Thank you. And don't forget to tune into Invisible Tears wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
That's right, guys. Listen to Invisible Tears.
Yeah, I get really detailed, and you'll hear my whole story. I'm completely transparent on my podcast.
And if you're the kind of true crime podcast listener who likes to play detective, feel free to do so. Just don't go to Jane's house.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you have tips, you're convinced you're right, contact the authorities. And
yes.
But don't contact Jane. Leave her alone.
Yes. Contact the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit in Concord, New Hampshire.
All right. All right. Have a good day, Jane. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.